I still remember the way the rain hit the pavement that night. Cold. Relentless. Indifferent. Just like them. My aunt stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a fake look of pity on her face. My uncle stood beside her, holding my mother's jewelry box, the last thing I had of her, and he didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. "You're 18 now, Damien," my aunt said, her voice syrupy sweet, the way people talk to a stray dog before they kick it away. "It's time for you to make your own way in the world." She made it sound like an opportunity. Like she was doing me a favor. But we all knew the truth, they were throwing me out to keep everything my mother left behind. I had nothing. No home, no family, no money. Just the clothes on my back in a world that didn't give a damn whether I lived or died. And as the door slammed shut behind me, I realized something. This was the moment my life truly began. Despair doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in slowly, like water seeping into a crack, freezing, expanding, until one day, you shatter. I stood outside that house for hours, the cold gnawing at my bones. I didn't have anywhere to go. The streets weren't a home, but they were all I had left. I wasn't always like this. Just a few months ago, I had a life. A mother who loved me. A future. Then she got sick. At first, it was just exhaustion. Then the weight started dropping off her, her skin turning pale, her eyes losing their light. The doctors said it was cancer. Stage 4. They told me to prepare for the worst, but nothing prepares you for watching the person you love most wither away. The day she died, I held her hand until her fingers went cold. And that was the day my world ended. Or at least, I thought it had. The funeral was small. My aunt and uncle barely looked at me, whispering behind my back. I was too numb to care. I thought they were grieving too. I thought they loved her. I was wrong. The will should have been clear. My mother worked hard her whole life. She left me a house, some savings, and enough to start over. But my aunt and uncle, they were greedy. And they were smart. They convinced the lawyers I was too young to handle it. That it was better if they managed the money until I was ready. Ready for what? To be homeless? They told me it was temporary. That it was for my own good. And I believed them. I trusted them. Until the day they packed my bags and told me to leave. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when I curled up in an alley that first night, trying to ignore the rats scurrying nearby. Not when hunger twisted my stomach into knots, or when exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision. The streets were a different kind of battlefield. And I was unarmed. I learned fast. I learned which places had the best trash to pick through. Which store owners would chase you away and which would give you a piece of bread if you looked pitiful enough. I learned to sleep lightly because there was always someone ready to steal whatever little you had. But most of all, I learned how to survive. And survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about people. Watching them. Understanding them. Figuring out what they wanted, and giving it to them before they even asked. That was my gift. Some people fought with fists. Others with money. I fought with my mind. It started small. Helping other homeless guys talk their way into shelters. Finding ways to get free meals. Then it got bigger. Scamming rich tourists who thought they were too smart to be scammed. Sneaking into libraries during the day, devouring books on business, law, psychology, anything that could give me an edge. And then, one day, I met the man who changed my life. He saw something in me. Something no one else had. "You're smarter than this, kid," he told me, tossing me a $50 bill. "Let's see what you can really do." That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped surviving. And started winning. If there's one thing I learned on the streets, it's this: power isn't about money. It's about control. And the first step to power? Making yourself useful. The man who gave me that $50 bill was named Vincent Lauder. He wasn't just some rich guy throwing cash at a beggar to clear his conscience. No, Vincent was calculating. A businessman. A shark in a suit. And he saw something in me that no one else had, potential. You ever played poker, kid? He asked me that night. I had. Well, not officially. But I'd spent enough nights watching drunks gamble their last dollars away to know the game wasn't about cards. It was about people. Reading them. Manipulating them. Making them think they had the upper hand right until you took it away. Vincent had me sit in on a game. Not to play, just to watch. Tell me who's gonna win, he said. I did. And I was right. By the third game, he wasn't asking me anymore. He was listening. That was how it started. Vincent had a business, a very gray area kind of business. High-stakes gambling. Underground deals. The kind of circles where fortunes were made and destroyed overnight. It wasn't legal, but it wasn't stupid either. Everything had layers. Protections. Loops that kept the law just far enough away. And he let me in. At first, I was just watching. Learning. But Vincent wasn't the kind of man who kept dead weight around. If I wanted to stay, I had to prove myself. So I did. The first time I made real money, it wasn't by playing cards. It was by playing people. There was this guy, Stefan. He was one of Vincent's regulars. The kind of gambler who thought he was smart but let his emotions control his hand. He was deep in debt, desperate to win it back, and blind to the fact that the house always wins. Watch him, Vincent told me one night. Tell me what he wants. So I watched. Stefan wasn't after money. Not really. He was after validation. He needed to prove he was better than the men around him. That he was in control. So I fed that. I started small, little comments here and there. Subtle nudges. Man, if I had half your instincts, I'd be rich by now. Damn, you read that guy like a book. No wonder you're a regular here. I bet you could take Vincent in a hand if you really wanted to. And just like that, I planted the seed. Within an hour, Stefan was convinced he was on the verge of a big win. He bet recklessly, pushed too far, and by the end of the night, he owed Vincent more money than he could count. I remember the way Vincent looked at me after that. You just made me 10 grand without lifting a finger, he said. Kid, you're gonna be something big. That was the night I stopped being some homeless nobody. Vincent took me in. Gave me a place to stay, nothing fancy, just a spare room in one of his properties, but it was warm. Safe. A place to think. More importantly, he gave me access. To his world. To his contacts. To power. And I absorbed everything. Business wasn't just about numbers. It was about knowing what people needed before they even realized it themselves. About pulling the strings in the background so that, by the time they made a decision, they thought it was their idea. And I got good at it. Within a year, I wasn't just working for Vincent, I was his right-hand man. The one pulling in high rollers, handling deals, making sure the money never stopped flowing. And then, one day, I realized something. I didn't need Vincent anymore. The moment I took control of my own fate was the moment I became unstoppable. It started with a single deal. A businessman, wealthy, arrogant, and drowning in secrets, came into our club. He thought he was untouchable. I found out otherwise. See, most people think blackmail is about having dirt on someone. But real blackmail? Real leverage? It's about knowing exactly when to reveal that dirt for maximum effect. I didn't go to Vincent. I handled it myself. By the end of the week, I had my first $100,000 sitting in a private account under a fake name. By the end of the month, I had my own network. And by the end of the year, I had walked away from Vincent completely. I built something bigger. Something smarter. Something untouchable. I didn't just survive. I conquered. Years passed. I climbed. I dominated. My name became one people whispered in backrooms, in board meetings, in places where real power was exchanged. I wasn't a street kid anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was Damian Carter. And the world belonged to me. But then, one day, I got a call. My aunt and uncle. The same people who threw me away like trash. They wanted to talk. They wanted to see me. And I knew, without a doubt, they wanted something else too. Money. Power. A way into my world. They thought I'd welcome them back. They thought I'd forgotten. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The message was short. Damian, it's your Aunt Linda. We need to talk. Please call us back. I stared at the text, my fingers tightening around the phone. It had been 10 years since I last saw her. 10 years since I stood in the rain, shivering, while she and Uncle Richard stole everything my mother left me and tossed me onto the streets like garbage. And now they wanted to talk? I could already guess why. People like Linda and Richard never reached out unless they needed something. Maybe they had debts. Maybe they wanted a piece of the empire I'd built. Maybe they thought I still had a single ounce of love left for them. They were wrong. But I was curious. So I called. She answered on the first ring. Damian? Her voice was shaky, uncertain. A far cry from the confident, patronizing tone she had used the last time we spoke. That's my name. I kept my voice flat, giving her nothing. There was a pause. A deep breath. Then. We'd really love to see you. It's been so long. There's so much we need to talk about. I almost laughed. They didn't even try to ease into it. No, how have you been? No, I'm sorry for everything. Just straight to what they wanted. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline from the top floor of my office. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Where are you? I asked. A pause. She hadn't expected me to agree so easily. We're still at the house, Damian. Your mother's house. You should come visit. My blood went cold. My mother's house. The house they stole. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't their home. It had never been. But soon, they'd learn exactly what it meant to steal from me. I'll be there in an hour. I pulled up to the house in a sleek black car that cost more than the entire neighborhood. Linda and Richard were waiting on the porch, and for a brief moment, I could see the flash of recognition in their eyes, the realization that I wasn't the helpless kid they had thrown out a decade ago. I was something else now. I stepped out, adjusting my suit jacket, and their expressions shifted, a mixture of guilt, nerves, and something else. Greed. Damian, it's so good to see you. Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Richard, who had always been the more arrogant of the two, tried to play it cool. Been a long time, kid. He looked me up and down, eyes lingering on the Rolex on my wrist. Looks like life's treated you well. I didn't smile. Better than you, I imagine. The smugness on his face faltered for half a second before he forced out a laugh. Come on inside, Linda said quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. Let's talk. I stepped through the door and felt the memories hit me like a punch to the gut. The staircase where my mother used to sit and read. The living room where we'd watch old movies together. The home that was stolen from me. But there was something else. It was falling apart. The furniture was old, worn down. The wallpaper was peeling. The place reeked of desperation. So, they weren't just reaching out to me for fun. They needed help. I took a seat on the couch and waited. Richard cleared his throat. Look, Damian. We know, we didn't part on the best terms. Understatement of the century. But we're still family. And family helps each other, right? I tilted my head. Is that why you took everything my mother left me? Because you wanted to help? Linda flinched. That wasn't our decision. The lawyers. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. Cut the bullshit. We both know you convinced them I wasn't mature enough to handle my own inheritance. And then you threw me onto the streets the second you didn't need me anymore. Linda looked down. Richard just sighed. We made some mistakes, he admitted. But that's in the past. We should be focusing on the future. There it was. The ask. We're in a bit of financial trouble, Linda said softly. It's been hard these past few years. The economy, the bills. We were hoping you could help us out. Help them out. The people who stole everything from me. The people who left me to rot. The people who never looked back. I felt a slow, sharp smile stretch across my lips. How much? Linda's eyes lit up. Richard sat up straighter. Not much, she said quickly. Just enough to get back on our feet. Maybe $500,000? I laughed. Hard. They flinched at the sound. You really think I'd hand over $500,000 to you? I shook my head. You must be even dumber than I remember. Richard's face turned red. Watch your mouth, boy. Or what? I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet. You'll kick me out again? Steal from me again? Newsflash, Richard, I own this city now. You're nothing but a parasite begging for scraps. Linda tried again. Please, Damien. We're family. We. I stood up. You stopped being my family the day you threw me onto the streets. She reached for my arm. Damien. I yanked it away. This house? I gestured around. It was never yours. It was my mother's. And do you know what I did a week ago? They stared at me, confused. I smiled. I bought it. Linda's face drained of color. Richard sat up. What? I bought it, I repeated. The house, the land, everything. And guess what? The new owner doesn't want tenants who can't pay their bills. Linda's breath hitched. You wouldn't. I leaned in, my voice cold. You have 1 week to get out. Silence. Pure, heavy, desperate silence. Then, for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Good. I turned and walked to the door, pausing just before stepping out. Oh, and one more thing. I glanced back at them. Family helps each other, right? Well, consider this me helping you learn a valuable lesson. And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back. Because they weren't my family anymore. The thing about revenge? It's best served slow. Throwing them out of my mother's house would have been enough for most people. But I wasn't most people. Linda and Richard didn't just steal my home. They stole my future. They left me to starve on the streets while they lived off the money my mother worked her whole life to save. And now, after all these years, they thought they could slither back into my life and take from me again? No. I was going to make sure they lost everything. It started with a phone call. Damien, please. Linda's voice cracked. She had called me 3 days after I visited them. We don't have anywhere to go. We can't afford another place right now. You can't just. I can, I cut in. And I already did. But. You have 4 days left. Use them wisely. I hung up. It wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the fear I felt. To wake up every morning unsure of where they'd sleep that night. So, I did what I did best. I dug. And what I found was pathetic. Linda and Richard weren't just broke, they were drowning. Unpaid mortgage. Loans. Maxed out credit cards. The house wasn't even fully paid off. They had used my mother's money to finance a life they couldn't afford, and when that ran out, they kept spending. Like leeches who didn't realize the body they fed off was already dead. So, I made some calls. Pushed a few buttons. And in less than a week, their entire world collapsed. The bank foreclosed on them the day before they were supposed to leave. The sheriff showed up before sunrise. They didn't just lose the house, they lost their cars, too. Their accounts? Frozen. I made sure of it. Richard tried to fight it. But you can't fight a ghost. You can't fight someone who exists in the shadows, pulling the strings from a place you can't even reach. I wasn't some homeless kid anymore. I was Damian Carter. And I owned them. I watched from my car as they were forced out onto the street. It was poetic, really. 10 years ago, they left me with nothing. And now they knew exactly how it felt. Linda sobbed into her hands. Richard sat on the curb, silent for the first time in his miserable life. I rolled down my window and let them see me. Their faces twisted when they saw the pristine suit, the luxury car, the man they had tried to erase. I could see it in their eyes, regret. Not for what they did. No, people like them never feel true remorse. They regretted getting caught. Regretted betting against the wrong man. I stepped out, walking toward them slowly. They flinched as I stopped in front of them. Not so fun being homeless, is it? I asked, tilting my head. Linda hiccuped through a sob. Please, Damian. We have nowhere to go. Richard clenched his jaw. You think this makes you a man, he spat. Kicking family when they're down? I crouched in front of him, my voice dangerously quiet. You stopped being my family the day you left me to rot. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $1 bill. I flicked it at Richard's feet. Consider this my final handout. I turned on my heel and walked away. Behind me, Linda choked on her sobs. Richard didn't say a word. And me? I didn't feel a damn thing. Revenge tastes sweet at first. I had spent years dreaming of this moment. The day I would watch them crumble. The day I would take everything back. And I did. I destroyed them. Crushed them like insects under my boot. But as I sat in my office that night, staring out at the glittering city skyline, I felt something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. For the first time in 10 years, I had nothing left to fight against. No enemy. No battle. No unfinished business. I had one. So why did it feel so hollow? A knock on my office door pulled me from my thoughts. It was my assistant, Olivia. There's someone here to see you, she said hesitantly. Linda Carter. I stared at her. She made it past security? She begged. Olivia hesitated. She's a mess, Damian. Looks like she hasn't eaten in days. I could have told her to throw Linda out. I could have ignored her. But instead, I found myself saying, send her in. She stepped inside, and for a moment, I barely recognized her. Her once pristine blonde hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled and worn. She looked smaller. Fragile. Nothing like the woman who had smiled as she took everything from me. Damian, she whispered. Please. I don't know what else to do. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You don't know what to do? I repeated. Welcome to my world, Aunt Linda. That's exactly how I felt when you threw me out with nothing. She flinched. I know. I know we were wrong. I regret it every day. Her voice broke. I thought we were doing the right thing. I thought you needed to grow up, to stop. My voice was sharp. Linda swallowed, her hands shaking. I let the silence stretch, making her feel it. Then, finally, I spoke. Do you even know what happened to me after you kicked me out? Her lower lip trembled. I assumed you figured something out. You were always smart, Damian. I thought you'd find a way. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Find a way? I repeated. Yeah, I found a way. I spent nights starving. Sleeping in alleys. Fighting for scraps. I begged. I stole. I did things you can't even imagine just to survive. And all while you were sitting in my mother's house, spending my mother's money. Tears ran down her face. I can't change what we did, she whispered. I wish I could. But I can't. I exhaled slowly, fingers tapping against the desk. Why are you really here, Linda? She hesitated. Richard's gone. I frowned. Gone? He left me. After everything fell apart, he just walked away. Took whatever little money we had left and disappeared. She let out a choked breath. I have nothing, Damien. No money. No home. No one. Her eyes met mine. Please. I'm not asking for much. Just something. Enough to get back on my feet. I leaned forward. And tell me, Aunt Linda, I drawled, my voice dangerously soft, if the roles were reversed, would you have helped me? She opened her mouth. Closed it. She had no answer. Because the truth was no. She would have walked right past me on the street, just like she had for 10 years. I let that sink in before I stood up. I should throw you out, I said. I should let you rot the way you let me. Her breath hitched. But I won't. She looked up, eyes wide. You're helping me? I walked past her, stopping at the door. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. And then I opened the door. Get out. She stared at me, her lips trembling. Then, slowly, she nodded. And without another word, she left. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a breath. For the first time in years, I felt free. There was no anger left. No hatred. Just peace. Because I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won. That night, I stood at the window of my penthouse, watching the city I had conquered. It was mine now. The streets that once swallowed me whole? I owned them. The people who once ignored me? Now they whispered my name with respect. The life that was stolen from me? I built something greater in its place. And Linda? Richard? They were nothing. Ghosts from a past that no longer had power over me. I had spent years chasing revenge. And now that I had it, I realized something. It didn't matter. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Mr. Carter, what can I do for you? The house, I said, running a hand through my hair. I don't want it. You're selling it? I stared out the window, thinking about the past. No. I'm donating it. A pause. To who? A shelter. Somewhere for kids like me. The ones nobody looks out for. Another pause. This one longer. I'll handle it, my lawyer said. I didn't do it for Linda or Richard. I didn't do it to feel good. I did it because I remembered what it felt like to have nowhere to go. Because for all my success, all my power, I wasn't the same kid who had been thrown onto the streets. And I never wanted anyone else to feel that kind of pain. That was the difference between me and them. They took and took until there was nothing left. But me? I built. I created something that would outlast me. Something that mattered. Something my mother would have been proud of. The past had shaped me. But it no longer defined me. I was no longer Damien Carter, the homeless kid who had lost everything. I was Damien Carter, the man who had taken his fate into his own hands. And the future? It was mine to write. The end.